You don't get a say anymore. I didn't answer. I just pulled out my life savings and left them, with a mountain of debt. I never imagined that a piece of paper could cut deeper than a bullet. The bank employee looked at me silently, before speaking. Mr. Rollins, according to the registry, you are no longer the owner of the Ironwood Ranch. He showed me the document. There was my signature, my name, and beneath them, Julian Hayes and Marissa Hayes, my daughter and my son-in-law. The ranch that I had built with 40 years of work, valued at $600,000, had been transferred to their names. The notary insisted I had been present, signing. But while they were stealing my life, I was at the hospital, watching over my wife, Clarice. I left the bank with my vision blurred, thinking of only one thing. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't cry. I would simply wait. And when the time came, they would know the meaning of the silence of a humiliated man. But to understand how I reached that moment, we have to go back to the day they first told me to shut up. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. My name is Samuel Rollins, but everyone calls me Sam. I'm 72 years old. The Sunday lunch should have been what it always was. Hot biscuits on the wooden table, the savory smell of the pot roast and collard greens that Marissa prepared just like her mother taught her, and the voices of family filling the house I built brick by brick. But that Sunday, something changed forever. That Sunday, I learned that in my own house, I no longer had a voice. Julian Hayes, my son-in-law, was sitting at the head of the table, in my chair, with that assurance only men who believe the world owes them something possess. He spoke of business, of contracts, of plans to expand the ranch's production. I listened in silence, chewing slowly, feeling every bite become harder to swallow. We need to modernize everything, Julian said, gesturing with his fork. The old methods just don't work anymore, Sam. This ranch could yield triple if we invested in technology. I put my glass of water down, on the table, louder than I intended. The sound made everyone look up. Julian, I said, and my voice came out more tired than I had expected. This ranch has been yielding fruit for 40 years. I know every foot of this ground, every season. We don't need to reinvent what already works. Silence fell like a stone in a dry well. Julian set his silverware aside, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked at me with the expression I had learned to recognize. Pity mixed with impatience, as if he were dealing with a stubborn child. Pops, Marissa, my daughter, my only child, intervened, touching my arm gently. Julian just wants what's best for everyone. Best for everyone, I repeated, the words tasting bitter. This ranch is ours now. Pops, you don't get a say anymore. Julian's words sliced through the air, like a machete. I froze, my mouth slightly open, feeling the heat rise in my neck. Around the table, no one moved. My 8-year-old grandson, Trevor, stared at his plate, as if he wished he could disappear into it. Marissa lowered her eyes, and Julian held my gaze with a coldness I had never seen from him before. With all due respect, Sam, he continued, and there was something mocking in that respect. Things have changed. We need to make quick decisions. And well, at your age, it's better for you to rest. We'll take care of things. The laugh came next, brief, dry, but it was enough. Julian let out a little chuckle as he returned to his plate, as if he had made a trivial comment about the weather. And Marissa, Lord, Marissa smiled too. A small, almost apologetic smile, but one that pierced my chest like barbed wire. I didn't say anything else for the rest of the meal. I mechanically chewed, I drank water. I nodded when someone passed me something, but inside, something cracked. Or perhaps it didn't crack. Perhaps it hardened, like metal tempered by fire. After eating, while they settled in the living room to watch television, I stepped out onto the porch. The April sun beat down hard on the oak fences, on the corrals where the cattle I bought with my first savings were grazing. Every post in that fence carried my sweat. Every stone on the buffalo held the echo of my worn-out boots. "You don't get a say anymore," I muttered to myself, tasting the dry earth in my mouth. Marissa appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on an apron. "Pops, don't take it the wrong way. Julian is just stressed with business." "And you, baby girl?" I asked without turning to look at her. "Do you think I don't get a say either?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking from across a river. "Pops, we just want you to rest. You deserve it. Rest. What a pretty word for get out of the way." That night, lying in the bed I had shared with Clara for 45 years, I looked at the ceiling and thought of her absence. It had been barely 6 months since I lost her, 6 months since she closed her eyes at the hospital, while I held her hand. And now, the house we built together felt like enemy territory. Julian slept in the guest room, but not as a guest, as an owner. Marissa avoided my eyes when we talked about money or decisions. And me, Samuel Rollins, 72 years old, 4 decades of work. I had become a nuisance in my own life. But in that dark silence of the early morning, as the wind stirred the curtains and carried the smell of the fields, I made a decision. I wouldn't argue again. I wouldn't raise my voice again. I wouldn't offer explanations or demand respect. Instead, I would do something they would never expect from an old man who no longer has a say. I would watch them. I would wait. And in that very instant, without them noticing, I began to plan my exit, and theirs, too. The Ironwood Ranch was born from my empty hands and the blind faith of a woman named Clarice. The days following that Sunday humiliation passed in a heavy silence, but my mind was constantly traveling back to the past, to 1978, when these lands were nothing more than dry brush and stones. Clara was 25, and I was 28, newlyweds, with no more capital than $400 saved up and a dream that everyone thought was crazy. "Sam," Clara had told me that afternoon, as we looked at the arid land under the relentless sun, "if we dig together, it will bloom." And we dug. For 3 years we dug. We put up the first fence with cedar posts that I cut myself at dawn. We planted crops in soil that had to be watered with buckets because we didn't have an irrigation system. Clara cooked on a wood stove while I worked 18 hours a day. When Marissa was born, we rocked her to sleep among sacks of seeds and tools. 40 years later, Ironwood was a prosperous 300-acre ranch. Quality cattle, alfalfa we sold to neighboring ranches, 2 tractors, a drip irrigation system that I installed with loans I paid religiously for 10 years. Everything was valued, according to the latest appraisal, at $600,000. And now, sitting on the porch I built with my own hands, I watched Julian Hayes give orders to the hands as if he had been born the owner of all this. "Mr. Rollins," called Elijah, the foreman who had worked with me for 22 years. "I'm fine, Elijah," I lied, not taking my eyes off Julian. My son-in-law had come into our lives 5 years ago. "An agricultural engineer," he said, "a businessman." Marissa fell for his confidence, his elegant words, his promises of modernization. I welcomed him with open arms. A prepared son-in-law, I thought, would be a blessing for the ranch. When he asked me to invest in his alfalfa export project, I didn't hesitate. $40,000 of my savings went into his company. "It's for everyone, Sam," he had told me with that smile I now recognized as fake. "We're going to triple the profits." The profits never came. But Julian did, more and more often. With more and more opinions. With more and more control. First, they were suggestions. We should change the cattle feed supplier. Then they were decisions. I've already hired a new vet. Finally, they were orders. The hands will work on Sunday. We need to increase production. Marissa, my daughter, had become his echo. She repeated his words, defended his decisions, and when I tried to offer an opinion, she looked away, as if my 40 years of experience were just dust the wind should carry away. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the lunch where they silenced me, I found Julian in my office. He was reviewing the cattle sales contracts, papers scattered across the desk Clara gave me for our 20th anniversary. "Julian, what are you doing with those documents?" "Reviewing the contracts, Sam," he replied without looking up. "We need to optimize. We're losing money to intermediaries." "Those intermediaries are people I trust. 30 years working with them." "Exactly. 30 years, it's time to change." I approached the desk. I smelled the old coffee in his cup mixed with the scent of his expensive cologne. I reached out to take one of the contracts, but Julian gently pulled it away. "Relax, Mr. Rollins. I'll handle it. You just rest." That word again. Rest. As if resting were my only purpose. "Julian, this ranch belongs to the family." He interrupted me. And this time, he did look at me. "And the family needs it to be profitable. With all due respect, your methods are ancient." I left the office with my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from contained rage. That night, Marissa made pozole, my favorite dish. She served it in silence, avoiding my eyes, as she had done for weeks. Julian ate heartily, talking about new projects, investments, and contacts in Dallas. "Pops," Marissa finally said, "Julian and I were thinking maybe you should travel a bit. Rest. Go see your cousins in Georgia." "Travel?" My words came out rough. "Now that Mom is no longer here, and with you working so hard, you deserve to enjoy yourself." "Enjoy myself." Another elegant word for get lost. "I'm fine right here," I replied. Julian put down his spoon and wiped his mouth with studied calm. "Sam, it's not a suggestion. We need space to work without interference." Interference. I, Samuel Rollins, who raised this ranch from nothing, was an interference. I didn't reply. I finished my soup in silence, feeling every spoonful weigh heavily in my stomach. After dinner, while they were washing dishes, I went to my room and took the folder with the ranch deeds out of a drawer. I reviewed them one by one under the lamplight. Everything was in order. The ranch was in my name, the legal documents sound. But something in my gut told me to look deeper. The next day, under the pretense of going to the doctor, I went to the bank, the same institution where I had applied for my first loans 40 years earlier. I asked to speak with the loans manager. "Mr. Rollins, how can I help you?" "I want to review the status of my properties, confirm everything is in order." The manager typed on his computer. He frowned, typed again. "Please wait a moment." That moment turned into 10 minutes, then 20. When he returned, he carried a folder and an expression I didn't like. It was in that same month that I sensed something strange in the deeds, and fear began to smell like wet earth before rain. The word fraud sounds different when it's your own life that has been stolen. The bank manager returned with 3 other employees. They led me into a private office, where the air conditioning hummed like an angry swarm of bees. On the desk, they spread out documents that bore my name, my signature, my history, turned into betrayal. "Mr. Rollins," the manager began, his voice having that careful tone doctors use before giving bad news. "According to our records, you executed a property transfer 3 months ago. The Ironwood Ranch was transferred into the names of Julian Hayes and Marissa Hayes." The world stopped. "That's impossible," I said, my voice a hoarse whisper. "I never signed anything." They showed me the document. Official letterhead, notary seals, and there, on the bottom line, a signature that was supposedly mine. It resembled it, had my characteristics, but I knew my own handwriting as I knew the lines on my hands. And that signature, had something strange, a different slant on the S, a firmer stroke on the final R. "When does it say this was signed?" I asked, feeling the air conditioner's coldness sink into my bones. "March 15th. According to the public notary, you were present along with your daughter and son-in-law." I closed my eyes. March 15th. That date was burned into my memory. On March 15th, I was at Baylor Medical Center in Dallas, sitting by Clara's bedside, while the doctors tried to stabilize her after her third heart attack. Clara had died 2 days later, on March 17th, with my hand holding hers. "That day," I said, opening my eyes and looking steadily at the manager. "That day, I was in the hospital. My wife was dying." The silence in the office grew dense, heavy. The employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I have the hospital papers," I continued, my voice starting to tremble, not from weakness, but from fury. "I have records, witnesses, doctors who can confirm I did not leave that hospital for 3 days. The manager cleared his throat. "Mr. Rollins, I understand your situation, but legally, this document is valid. It is notarized with witnesses. If there were irregularities, you will have to proceed legally." "Irregularities," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "Is that what they call theft now?" I requested copies of everything. Every paper, every forged signature, every seal that legitimized the dispossession. I left the bank with a folder under my arm and the world swaying beneath my feet. I drove through the town streets with no fixed destination. I passed by Mr. Emilio's house, where we used to play dominoes on Fridays. I passed the church where Clara and I got married. I passed the school where Marissa took her first steps in the Mother's Day festival. And I thought, at what moment did I lose my daughter? When I arrived at the ranch, it was mid-afternoon. The sun was directly over the corrals. Julian was next to the shed, talking on the phone, laughing. Marissa was hanging clothes on the line, wearing that floral apron that had been her mother's. But when she saw me arrive, she quickly averted her eyes. That evil look held a hint of shame, a hint of guilt. I entered the house quietly. I went straight to my room and took out a metal box that I kept under the bed. Inside were the original deeds to the ranch. The 1978 papers when I bought the first 20 acres. The enlargements from 1985 and 1992. The loan payments. The current deeds. In my name, Samuel Rollins. Everything in order. Everything legal. Everything stolen. That night during dinner, I watched them as if seeing them for the first time. Julian ate with appetite, talking about a new contract to Sunil Hay. Marissa nodded, smiled, poured more water, but her hands trembled slightly as she refilled my glass. My grandson, Trevor, was drawing in a notebook, oblivious to the poison floating in the air. "How was your day, Pops?" Marissa finally asked, a forced cheerfulness in her voice. Quiet, I replied. I went to the bank. Personal matters. I saw Julian look up for just a second. I saw his eyes meet Marissa's. I saw the silent message pass between them, quick as lightning. They knew. They knew that I knew. Everything in order? Julian asked. His voice sounded casual, but his knuckles were white on the fork. Everything in order, I lied. And for the first time in my life, lying tasted good. After dinner, I went out to the porch. The stars were shining over the ranch that was no longer mine. I heard the lowing of the cattle I bought with my savings. I felt the breeze that carried the smell of the alfalfa I planted with my hands. Every fence I saw in the dim light reminded me of a battle won. Every tree, a year of effort. Every stone on the path, a drop of sweat. And they had taken it all while I watched over my dying wife. Elijah, the foreman, approached with the slow walk of a man who has worked the land all his life. "Mr. Rollins, are you doing all right?" "I'm fine, Elijah," I said, and my voice sounded strangely calm. "Have you noticed anything strange lately? In the papers? In the decisions?" The old foreman looked toward the house where the living room lights shone warmly. "Mr. Rollins, it's not my place to say, but I have noticed things. Mr. Hayes has been moving cattle without consulting you. He's changed contracts." "What else, Elijah?" "He's been talking about mortgaging the ranch." The words fell on me like stones. I didn't say anything else. I told Elijah good night and returned to my room. I sat on the bed I had shared with Clara for 45 years. I caressed her photograph on the nightstand. "Forgive me, Clara," I whispered. "Forgive me for not protecting what we built." But as tears rolled down my wrinkled cheeks, something else grew in my chest. It wasn't just pain. It wasn't just betrayal. It was determination. They had taken my voice. They had taken my respect. They had taken my ranch. But what they didn't know, what they never imagined, is that a 72-year-old man who built an empire from nothing also knows how to destroy anyone. They were still laughing that night, unaware that the quiet old man had already begun digging their financial graves. The first change arrived on a Tuesday morning. The office locks were new. I tried to open the door with my key, as I had done for 40 years. The key turned in the empty space. I tried again, thinking maybe the mechanism was stuck with dust. Nothing. The lock had been changed. "Looking for something, Sam?" Julian appeared behind me with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He offered me one with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The door won't open," I said, stating the obvious. "Oh yeah, we changed the locks yesterday for security. You know, with so many employees coming and going. Here's your coffee." He didn't offer me a new key. He simply stood there, waiting for me to leave. "I need to check the contracts for—" "I already took care of that," he interrupted. "Everything under control. You better enjoy your coffee on the porch. It's a beautiful morning." I walked away with the cup in my hand, feeling the heat burn my fingers. From the porch, I watched Julian enter my office. Through the window, I saw him sit in my chair, propping his feet up on my desk. The following days were a succession of small dispossession. Elijah came to ask me about planting alfalfa in the north lot, as he had done every season for 22 years. Before I could answer, Julian appeared. "Elijah, from now on, all decisions go through me. Mr. Rollins is retired." "Retired?" Elijah looked at me, confused. "Retired?" Julian confirmed firmly. "It's for the best, for everyone." Elijah left without waiting for my response, because there was no response left to wait for. A week later, I found all the ranch hands gathered by the shed. Julian was in front, with a tablet in his hand, talking about new schedules, new work quotas. Starting tomorrow, you'll also work Sundays. We need to double production. But Mr. Hayes, Elijah protested, Sundays have always been for rest. Mr. Rollins doesn't make the decisions here anymore. The words floated in the hot May air. The hands looked at me, waiting for me to say something, to defend tradition, to defend them. I opened my mouth and closed it again. What was the point? The ranch was no longer mine. My voice no longer mattered. I was a ghost on my own land. That night, Marissa came to my room. She knocked softly before entering, as if I were a stranger she needed permission from. Pops, I need to talk to you. Tell me. She sat on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands in her lap. She had dark circles under her eyes, as if she wasn't sleeping well. Part of me wanted to console her. The other part felt only emptiness. Pops, I know this is all difficult for you, but it's just to get better organized. Julian has experience in administration. You've worked for so long, you deserved a rest. That word again, rest. As if I were an old horse that needed to be taken to pasture, to die in peace. And the locks, baby girl? That's organization, too? She averted her gaze. It's for security. There are important papers, contracts that I signed, contracts that I negotiated. Pops, please, don't make this harder. Harder for who, Marissa? She stood up, tears glistening in her eyes. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration. From a daughter who wanted her father to simply obey and disappear. For everyone, she replied. For everyone. Pops. She left the room, closing the door softly. The sound of the latch was like a tombstone falling on a grave. Days turned into weeks, and I became a guest in the house I built brick by brick. I no longer sat at the head of the table. That seat belonged to Julian. I sat to the side where occasional visitors used to sit. I ate silently, while they talked about plans, investments, and futures that did not include me. In the mornings, I walked the ranch like a specter. The hands greeted me with respect, but they no longer consulted me. The decisions came from Julian. The orders came from Julian. The ranch answered to Julian. One afternoon, I found my grandson, Trevor, crying behind the barn. What happened, son? Dad yelled at me, he sobbed. I asked him if you could teach me to ride, like you promised, and he got mad. He said you don't run things here anymore. I hugged the boy, feeling his small body tremble against my chest, and in that moment, something inside me crystallized. It wasn't rage, it wasn't pain, it was absolute clarity. They could take the office. They could take my seat at the table. They could take the respect of the employees. They could even take the ranch with falsified papers. But there was one thing they couldn't take from me. Time. And I had patience. 72 years of life had taught me that vengeance isn't shouted. It's cooked slowly, like the pot roast Clara used to prepare for hours, until every ingredient reveals its true flavor. That night, I sat on the porch, looking at the stars. I heard Julian and Marissa's laughter inside, celebrating some new achievement. I heard the clinking of wine glasses that they probably bought with my money, and I smiled. It was a small, bitter smile, but a smile nonetheless, because while they celebrated their victory, I was already drawing up my strategy. While they slept peacefully, thinking they had won, I was counting every move I would make to get back what was mine. Not with shouts, not with violence, not with tears, with silence, with patience, with the wisdom of a man who built a ranch from nothing, and who therefore knew exactly how to dismantle everything. A quiet old man is dangerous because no one knows what he thinks. No one knows what he plans. No one imagines what he is capable of until it's too late. And for Julian and Marissa, it was almost too late. What they didn't know is that the silence of a betrayed man is worth more than any inheritance. Mr. Harrison Reed was 84 years old and had a memory sharper than any computer. I found him in his downtown office, a place that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. The walls were lined with civil codes, legal precedents, and photographs of cases won during 60 years of practice. Mr. Reed had been my father's lawyer, then mine, and he knew every square foot of land in the county. "Sam Rollins," he said when I entered, rising with difficulty from his leather chair. "Haven't seen you in months. My condolences about Clarice. She was a great woman." "Thank you, Harrison." "Sit down. By the look on your face, you've come for more than a courtesy visit." I handed him the folder with all the documents, the falsified deeds, the bank records, the hospital papers that proved I was in Dallas on the day of the supposed signing. Mr. Reed put on his reading glasses and reviewed every page with the meticulousness of a jeweler examining gold. The silence lasted for 20 minutes. The only sounds were the ticking of the antique clock on the wall and the rustling of the pages. Finally, he took off his glasses and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Sam, this is notary fraud, forgery, dispossession. These are serious felonies." "I know." "Do you want to proceed legally?" "Because I can." "No," I interrupted him. "Not yet." Mr. Reed raised an eyebrow. "Then I want to know if there is a way to recover my ranch without them noticing, legally. I want them to believe they won until it's too late." A slow smile appeared on the old lawyer's wrinkled face. "Now, I understand why your father always said you were the most cunning of his children." We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail. Mr. Reed explained the flaws in the transfer process, the impossible date, the lack of real witnesses, the notary, who had most likely been bribed or misled. "But there's something else," Mr. Reed said, gently tapping the desk with his pipe. "If they try to mortgage or sell the ranch, they will need additional documentation, and that's where we can act. We can block any transaction by alleging inconsistencies in the deeds, without them knowing it was me, without them knowing it was you, at least not immediately. How much time do you need?" "Give me 2 weeks. I'll move the necessary papers. I'll file the inconsistencies with the county records office. When they try to use those fake deeds for any transaction, they'll hit a wall." I left Mr. Reed's office with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. It wasn't the naive hope that everything would fix itself. It was the cold, calculated hope of a man who knew exactly what to do to recover what had been stolen from him. But first, I needed to protect what they still had access to: my money. The next day, under the pretense of going to the doctor, I visited the 3 bank branches where I held accounts. In the first, I withdrew $80,000. In the second, $94,000. In the third, $60,000. In total, $234,000 in cash. My life savings, 40 years of work, Clara's pension, the ranch profits that still legally belonged to me. Mr. Rollins, the manager of the last bank, asked me, "Are you sure?" "That's a lot of cash." "Completely sure. I'm going to invest in a business." A lie. I was going to protect it from the hands that had already robbed me once. I opened a new account in a bank in the next county. 2 hours away, an account that only I knew about. I deposited the entire cash amount, $234,000, that Julian and Marissa would never find. When I returned to the ranch that afternoon, my hands were empty, but my step was lighter. Julian was in the yard, supervising the loading of hay. "How was the doctor, Sam?" "Good, good. Just routine checkups." "And what did he say?" "Everything in order," I replied. There was something in his tone, a feigned curiosity that hid something else, suspicion, fear. "Everything in order for a man my age," I replied, stooping a little more than necessary. "Though he prescribed more medicine, the blood pressure, you know. And he told me to avoid stress." I saw Julian relax his shoulders, his smile becoming more genuine. "All the more reason, Sam. Let us handle everything. You just rest." That night at dinner, I played my part to perfection. I trembled a little when pouring water. I dropped my fork once. I asked them to repeat things because I hadn't heard clearly. I complained about my back, the tiredness, my age. Marissa looked at me with genuine pity. "Pops, do you want us to call the doctor?" "No, baby girl. I'm just tired. I'm very tired." And I was, but not the kind of tired they imagined. I was tired of feigning weakness, when inside I was pure tempered steel. I was tired of hearing their plans when I already had mine in motion. I was tired of seeing them celebrate a victory that was about to become their worst nightmare. That night, before sleeping, I took the deposit slip for the $234,000 out of my wallet. I kept it in the same place Clara used to hide her jewelry, inside an old prayer book that no one else would ever look at. Mr. Reed called exactly 1 week later. "Sam, it's done. I filed the inconsistencies. The county office has frozen any transaction on the ranch until the legal situation is cleared up. If they try to sell or mortgage, they won't be able to. And do they know yet? They won't know until they try to make a move. Perfect. Sam, are you sure about this? Once they know, the war will be open." "The war already started, Harrison. They began it when they forged my signature, while I watched over my dying wife. I'm just finishing it." I hung up the phone and looked out the window. Julian was loading boxes into his truck. Marissa was watering the garden plants. Everything so normal. Everything so quiet. They didn't know that the ground beneath their feet was already cracking. That the ranch they thought was theirs was trapped in a legal limbo. That the money they planned to use had already flown away. And best of all, they had no idea that the decrepit old man who dragged his feet and forgot things was playing a game of chess they didn't even know had begun. While they slept peacefully, I signed the document that would seal their fate. The trap closed on a Thursday morning when Julian returned from the bank with a face the color of ash. I was on the porch, rocking slowly in the chair Clara gave me for my 50th birthday. I pretended to sleep with my hat over my face and my hands crossed over my chest, but from beneath the brim I watched everything. Julian got out of the truck, slamming the door hard enough to startle the chickens. Marissa ran out of the kitchen. "What happened? Did you get the loan?" "No," Julian's voice was shaking. "I didn't get it. Something is wrong. Really wrong." "What do you mean?" "The ranch. The deeds. The bank says there are inconsistencies in the documentation, that they can't process any mortgage until the legal situation of the property is cleared up." I felt my heart beat harder, but I kept my breathing steady. My body was still. Just an old man sleeping in the sun. "Inconsistencies?" Marissa's voice went up an octave. "What kind of inconsistencies?" They didn't tell me exactly, just that the county office has an alert on the property, that there are contradictory documents. There was a long silence. I could feel their eyes searching each other's faces. I could smell their fear, mixing with the dry June air. Do you think he started it, Marissa? No, Julian cut her off quickly. Look at him. He can barely walk straight. He has no idea how these legal things work. How wrong they were. But Julian, we need that money. The company. The debts. I know, Marissa. I know. I waited until they went inside before opening my eyes. The sun shone brightly on the lands they had stolen from me, on the fences my hands had raised, on the future they thought they had secured, which was now crumbling like sand between their fingers. The following weeks were a descent into hell, and I had a front row seat. Julian started getting calls, many calls, suppliers demanding payments, partners claiming investments, the bank pressuring for a previous loan I knew nothing about. Every day, his face looked more haggard, grayer, more desperate. Marissa stopped smiling. The dark circles on her face became permanent. The food on the table diminished in quantity and quality. There was no more wine at dinner, no more laughter. One night, I heard shouting from their room. I told you it was risky. Marissa's voice pierced the walls. I told you we should wait. We needed to expand the business, Julian retorted. How was I supposed to know the old man? The old man. The old man what, Julian? A silence that weighed like lead. The next month, the bankmen arrived. Not at the ranch, but at Julian's export company in town. I found out from Elijah, who heard it from a cousin who worked at the city hall. Mr. Rollins, Elijah told me in a low voice, while we checked the fences on the west lot. They say Mr. Hayes owes $180,000, that they seized the offices, that the company went bankrupt. $180,000, I repeated, feigning surprise. That's what they say, boss. And there's more. They say he invested poorly, that he gambled on a business that didn't pan out. And now the creditors want their money. That afternoon, when I returned to the house, I found Julian sitting on the porch steps. His head was in his hands, a half-empty bottle of bourbon beside him. I sat down next to him without saying anything. The silence stretched like a shadow. I lost everything, Sam, he finally said, his voice cracking. Everything. The company, the contracts, the savings, everything. The ranch? I asked softly. I can't touch it. There's some legal issue I don't understand. The lawyer says it could take months to resolve, and I don't have months. The creditors are pressuring me. They want to seize everything I own. Everything. The truck, the furniture, even the company tools. And if I don't pay, in 30 days, his voice broke. They say they can go after Marissa, too. After her things. After her... He didn't finish the sentence. He brought the bottle to his lips and took a long drink. Julian, I said, my voice sounding softer than he deserved. What did you do with the $40,000 I loaned you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. You lost it, didn't you? In that business that went bankrupt. It was going to work out, he whispered. It was going to multiply. We were all going to be fine. But it didn't work out, did it? I stood up slowly, feigning the effort of age. I looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky orange and purple. Now, Julian, I said with absolute calm. Now, the land belongs to the man who works it. I left him there, with his bottle and his defeat. 3 days later, Marissa knocked on my bedroom door. It was 11 o'clock at night. When I opened it, I found her with swollen eyes from crying. Pops. Her voice was a thin thread. I need to talk to you. Come in, baby girl. She sat on the edge of the bed, in the same spot where Clara used to sit when she needed to vent. For a moment, I saw the child she was, the one who hugged me when she was scared, the one who asked me to carry her after falling off the swing. Pops, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. What are you sorry for, Marissa? Everything. For silencing you, for pushing you aside, for letting Julian... Tears rolled down her cheeks. Pops, we're ruined. The creditors are going to take everything from us. I don't know what to do. I looked at her in silence. Part of me wanted to console her. The other part, the part that had been humiliated, dispossessed, and betrayed, felt only a cold emptiness. And what do you expect me to do, baby girl? I don't know. I just needed to tell you. I needed you to know that I regret it. She stood up to leave, but before opening the door, she turned to look at me one last time. Pops, did you have anything to do with the bank? With blocking the ranch? I looked her in the eyes of my only daughter, and I lied with the same ease with which they had forged my signature. Baby girl, I can barely remember where I left my glasses. Do you think I am capable of moving legal papers? She nodded, wanting to believe. The manila envelope remained on the kitchen table for 3 days before they came back. I looked at it every morning while I drank my coffee. I knew what it contained. I knew the weight of those papers. I knew that inside were the definitive proofs, documents that proved the fraud irrefutably, notarized testimonies, sworn declarations from the hospital doctors. That envelope wasn't meant to punish them today. It was meant to remind them, when the time came, that I still held the final word. Elijah kept me informed of everything. Julian had sold the truck to pay off part of the debt. Marissa had pawned her jewelry, even the ring Clara gave her for her wedding. They were now living in a rented house in town, a small place near the highway where the noise of the 18-wheelers kept them up at night. Mr. Rollins, Elijah told me one afternoon, did you know they forged the deeds? I suspected it, I replied, not entirely lying. And why didn't you do anything sooner? Because sometimes, Elijah, justice isn't shouted. It's sown. And when it grows, it yields bitter fruit that the one who sowed it must harvest. The old foreman nodded slowly, as if understanding something deeper than my words. It was a Saturday afternoon when I heard the sound of a familiar engine on the driveway. But it wasn't Julian's truck. It was an old borrowed car, surely with a broken exhaust and peeling paint. I stayed on the porch in my rocking chair, waiting. Julian got out first, and he wasn't the same man. The proud son-in-law who sat in my seat, who gave orders and smiled smugly, had disappeared. This Julian had a stooped back, wrinkled clothes, several days' worth of beard that wasn't style, but neglect. Marissa got out next, holding Trevor by the hand. My grandson had grown in these months, but his eyes held a sadness no child should know. Marissa didn't dare to look at me directly either. They stood at the bottom of the steps, like beggars waiting for permission to enter a place they once considered their own. Mr. Rollins, Julian began, his voice cracking. We need to talk to you. Talk? I said, without getting up from my chair. Julian walked up one step, then stopped. Tears were already running down his face without him trying to hide them. Forgiveness. That's what I came to ask for. Forgive me, Sam. Forgive me for everything. For silencing you. For displacing you. He swallowed with difficulty. For the deeds. There was the confession. The words that had been trapped in the air for months. The deeds? I asked calmly, as if I didn't know what he was talking about. I forged your signature, Julian continued, falling to his knees. It was my idea. I convinced Marissa it was for the best. I told her you were old, that we needed to secure the future, that—" He openly sobbed. "I lied. I manipulated. I stole. I am a thief, Mr. Rollins. A miserable thief." Marissa remained several steps back, Trevor's hand tightly pressed against hers. She cried in silence, without making a sound, just as Clara used to cry when she didn't want anyone to hear her. "And you, baby girl?" I asked. "Did you come to ask for forgiveness, too?" She took a step forward. Her voice was barely audible. "Pops, I knew. I didn't sign the papers. But I knew what Julian was going to do, and I didn't stop him. I betrayed you, too. I betrayed your trust, your love, everything you did for me. Why?" It was the only question that needed an answer. "Because I was afraid," Marissa replied. "Afraid there wouldn't be enough for us. Afraid Julian would leave if things didn't work out. Afraid of being nothing without him." "And now," I asked, "now that you have nothing, what are you?" No one answered. I got up slowly from the chair, went into the house, and returned with a folder I had stored in my room. The same folder Mr. Reed had prepared with such meticulousness. "Do you know what this is?" I asked, showing them the documents. Julian shook his head, still on his knees. "These are the original deeds to the ranch. The real ones, with all the inconsistencies of your fake documents exposed. With proof that I was in the hospital when I summarily signed the transfer, with the testimonies of the doctors, the nurses, even the cafeteria employee who sold me coffee those nights." I opened the folder and showed them the last document, a new deed dated just 2 weeks ago. "The Ironwood Ranch has been returned to its rightful owner, Samuel Rollins. All legal, all documented, all irreversible." The silence that followed was heavier than any word. "Pops," Marissa whispered. "Since when? Since I found out what you did. Since the day I went to the bank and saw that forged signature. From that moment on, I started moving every piece on the board." Julian looked up, and in his eyes I saw something that surprised me. It wasn't anger. It was relief. The relief of a man who could finally stop carrying the weight of his lie. "Are you going to report us?" he asked. The question hung in the hot July air. I looked at my daughter, who held my grandson. I looked at Julian, destroyed on the wooden steps I built with my hands. I looked at the ranch behind them, the lands that were still mine, that had always been mine. "No," I finally replied. "I'm not going to report you, but I'm not going to help you either," I continued. "You dug your own financial grave. You gambled my inheritance and you lost it. Now you will live with the consequences." "It's fair," Julian said, getting to his feet with difficulty. "It's more than we deserve." They prepared to leave. Marissa approached as if to hug me, but stopped halfway. She understood that she had lost that right, too. "Goodbye, Pops. Goodbye, baby girl." I watched them drive away on the dirt road. The old car coughed black smoke before starting. Trevor waved to me from the back window, and I raised my hand in response. When the car disappeared around the bend, I returned to the house. On the kitchen table, the manila envelope was still waiting. I picked it up, feeling its weight. Inside was something neither Julian nor Marissa knew about. Something that would change everything once more if I decided to use it, but I wouldn't. I went out to the backyard and started a small fire pit. I opened the envelope, and one by one, I tossed the documents into the flames. The evidence that could have sent them to prison. The testimonies that would have completely destroyed their lives. The declarations that would have taken away their last hope. I watched the flames consume the paper as the black smoke rose into the clean afternoon sky. "Why are you doing that, boss?" asked Elijah, who had seen everything from the corral. "Because true vengeance, Elijah, isn't destroying the other person. It's rebuilding yourself so completely that the traitor's absence becomes irrelevant." 2 years after Clara's death, the Ironwood Ranch was blooming again. I got up before dawn, as I had done for 50 years. I made coffee on Clara's stove, using her favorite pot, which had a twisted handle, but which I never dared to throw away. The aroma filled the empty kitchen, and for a moment I could almost hear her voice. Elijah arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, as always. "Morning, boss. The cattle in the north lot need checking." "Let's go," I replied, taking my hat. We walked together over the lands that were mine again. And not just on paper. In every repaired fence, in every clean furrow, in every healthy animal. Ironwood was breathing again, but differently. Quieter, more honest. Of the $234,000 I rescued, I invested $120,000 in modernizing the property. A new irrigation system, improvements to the corrals, a tractor that Elijah learned to drive as if he were born to it. The ranch was prospering again, but without the excessive ambition Julian dreamed of. Just honest land, yielding honest fruit. The other $14,000 I kept in a special account. Mr. Reed died 4 months after resolving my case. In his will, he left instructions that his fees were to be forgiven. Sam read the letter his son handed me. "Your friendship was worth more than any dollar." I cried that afternoon for Harrison, for the years that had passed, for everything I gained and everything I lost. But life continues. And with it came Trevor. My grandson showed up one Saturday morning, 6 months after that painful visit. He arrived alone, walking up the dirt road, with a backpack over his shoulder. He was 9 years old now, taller, thinner, but with the same clear eyes Clara had. "Grandpa," he said when he reached the porch, "Mom doesn't know I'm here. I ran away from town. I walked 2 hours. Why, son? Because I want to learn. I want you to teach me about the ranch, like you promised." I looked at him in silence. Behind him, in the distance, Marissa was probably searching for him desperately. "Come inside," I said. "I'll make you breakfast. Then we'll call your mother." I called Marissa. She cried on the phone. She thanked me through sobs, but she didn't ask to come over. She knew that door was still closed. From that day on, Trevor came every Saturday. I taught him everything. How to check the cattle, how to repair fences, how to read the sky to predict rain, how to respect the earth that feeds you, how to be a man of your word. "Grandpa," he asked me one day while we were planting hay, "why does Mom never come onto the ranch?" He had noticed how she would drop him off at the start of the driveway. She would wait in a borrowed car until I accompanied him back, but she never crossed the gate. Because there are doors, Trevor, that are closed by betrayal. And they only open with time. A lot of time. Even if she says she's sorry. Forgiveness doesn't open doors, son. Forgiveness only eases the burden of the person who gives it. But trust, that has to be rebuilt, brick by brick. The boy nodded, with a seriousness that didn't match his age. Marissa tried to speak with me directly, only once more, a year after I recovered the ranch. She knocked on the door with trembling hands. When I opened it, I saw a different woman, thinner, with premature gray hairs, with the rough hands of someone who now cleaned houses to help with expenses. "Pops," she began. "Trevor, is he okay?" I interrupted. Yes, he's fine. Thanks to you, he's fine. Do you need anything? Money? Food? She shook her head. I just needed to tell you that I understand. I understand why you did what you did. I understand that we deserve to lose everything. And I understand that you may never completely forgive me. Marissa, I said, and my voice came out softer than I expected. I already forgave you. The day I burned the papers that could have sent you to jail, I forgave you. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean things go back to how they were. I know, Pops. I just wanted you to know that I'm still your daughter, even if I don't deserve to be. You will always be my daughter, Marissa. That will never change. But the relationship we had, that died the day you signed my name while I watched over your mother. She nodded, wiping away tears. Thank you for taking care of Trevor. He's a good boy. That was our last direct exchange. After that, our communication was limited to brief, courteous, functional messages, empty of the warmth we once shared. Julian never returned to the ranch. According to what Trevor told me, his father was working at the hardware store in town. He had stopped drinking and was paying off his debts, penny by penny. It would take him 10 years to settle them all. Dad says you taught him the most important lesson of his life, Trevor told me one Saturday. And what was that? That there are no shortcuts to dignity. That everything built on lies collapses with the truth. I smiled. At least something had been learned. One afternoon, I called Trevor into my office. He was 11 years old now, and had shown not only interest, but genuine respect for the land. Son, I want to show you something. I took out the documents for the bank account I had opened in his name. $114,000, growing with interest. This is yours, but you can only access this money when you turn 25. And only if you've proven that you learned to work the land with honesty. His eyes went wide. Why, Grandpa? Because money that isn't earned is lost. Because the greatest inheritance I can leave you is not dollars, but principles. And because I want you to be the man your father couldn't be. The boy hugged my waist tightly. I promise, Grandpa. I promise. The ranch returned to what Clara and I always wanted, a place of peace. No excessive ambitions, no impossible plans, just land, work, and the eternal cycle of planting and harvest. One night, exactly 2 years after Clara's death, I sat on the porch under the stars. Trevor was asleep in the guest room, tired after learning to shoe horses. The wind blew softly, bringing the smell of damp earth. I did it, my love, I whispered, looking up at the sky. I protected what was ours, and your great-grandson will follow your steps. A shooting star crossed the firmament. The wind blew strongly, moving the leaves of the trees we planted 40 years ago. And in that sound, I found peace. I didn't answer when they silenced me. I didn't scream when they robbed me. I didn't cry when they betrayed me. I just waited. I watched. And when the time came, I recovered what was mine without violence, without blind vengeance, just with the patience of a 72-year-old man who knows that true justice is not rushed. The Ironwood Ranch will remain here when I am gone, and Trevor will inherit it, not because he is my grandson, but because he learned to love it as I loved on it, to respect it as I respected it, to work it as Clara and I worked it for a lifetime. That is my final vengeance. That what they tried to steal with lies remains in the family through the truth. And when Marissa sees her son become the new owner of these lands, She will understand that the legacy of an honest man always triumphs over the ambitions of those who forget where they came from. I closed my eyes, listening to the crickets swang and feeling the cool night breeze. For the first time in years, I slept in absolute peace. The ranch is blooming again under my hands and Trevor's. Marissa tries to get closer, but the gate never opens completely. Peace is not joy. It is rest. And teaching my grandson is my new legacy. And the price of dignity was high, but it was worth every dollar retrieved from their hands. I want to thank the channel Bradley's Stories for giving me this space to tell my truth. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe, hit the bell, and let me know in the comments. Would you forgive a child who betrayed you? Or would you close the door forever? Thank you for listening.